Here we are, fellas. When Michael Jackson set out to make his new solo album, he didn't know what he wanted to be the final result. However, he knew what he didn't want, and that was to make a record that sounded like a Jackson's album. From the start of his professional career, someone had decided the sound of Michael's music. First, it had been Motown's crack production staff and then the artists and repertoire executives at CBS Epic, though the family was given the freedom to write and produce the Disney album. Epic insisted that they record a song that they didn't write. Blaming the boogie, other concessions compro- and compromises were made along the way with the three albums for that label, and Michael never felt totally responsible for the results. While Disney hit single Shake Your Body reestablished the Jacksons in the marketplace, many observers in the music business felt, as Michael did, that the brothers had left their magic at Motown. Now Michael wanted more creative freedom. He wanted to do his next album totally outside the family, even though the brothers tried desperately to make his solo album a group production as soon as they heard about it. They were hurt that Michael wanted to exclude them from the project, but he stood firm. I'm doing this on my own, he said. They're just going to have to understand for once. Uncertain as to how to proceed, Michael called Quincy Jones, who offered a helping hand during the production of The Wiz. The two had their first exchange one day on the set as Michael rehearsed a scene in which, as a scarecrow, he pulled a slip of paper from his stuffing and read a quote by Socrates. He attributed the statement to Socrates as if rhyme with no rates. So Socrates. That's the way I always assumed it was pronounced. Michael said later. When he heard the crew giggling, he knew he had wrong. Socrates. Someone whispered in his ear, it's Socrates. He turned and saw Quincy, the film's musical director. The older man extended his hand. I'm Quincy Jones, he said with a warm smile. Anything I can help. Michael would remember the offer. A little more than a year later, he called Quincy and asked him to suggest possible producers for his solo endeavor. Quincy suggested himself. Quincy seemed an unlikely choice producer for Michael. He had found success in the pop R&B arena with his own albums, which were virtual music workshops of musicians, writers, and arrangers, with Jones overseeing the entire program. Quincy had also found mainstream success with the brothers Johnson, a sibling duo out of Los Angeles, whose platinum albums he produced. Still, most industry observers privately felt that Quincy was too musically rigid to make a great pop record. Many of these people believed that his records with the brothers Johnson, for instance, though successful, sounded too homogenized. The Socrates quote was ultimately edited for the final cut of The Wiz. Michael had actually met Quincy Jones when he was 12 at Sammy Davis Jr.'s home. Michael doesn't remember the meaning, though Quincy does. However, Quincy had a long and varied show business career, starting as a 15-year-old trumpet player and arranger for Lionel Hampton. Over the years, he immersed himself in studio work, arranging, composing, and producing for Dinah Washington, Duke Ellington, Big Maybelle, Tommy Dorsey, and Count Basie in the early 60s. He was a vice president of Mercury Records, the first black executives at a major label. In 1963, he began a second record in Hollywood, where he became the first black to reach the top rank in film composers, with 38 pictures to his credit, including The Wiz. I didn't want to do The Wiz, Quincy has said. I thought there was no way the public is going to accept the black version of The Wizard of Oz. I kept telling Sidney Lumet I didn't want to do it, but he's a great director, and because he hired me to do my first movie soundtrack, the Palm Broker 1965, I did it. Out of that mess came my association with Michael Jackson. When Quincy and Michael came together in a recording studio in Los Angeles to start laying rhythm tracks together in 1979, the artist and producer turned out to be a perfect match. Quincy's in studio work method was to surround the artist with superior songs and find musicians, and then let that artist have free reign. Michael had been so accustomed to being on a short creative leash, he was ecstatic when Quincy began taking his ideas seriously. Quincy recalled that at first he found Michael very, very introverted, shy, and non assertive. He wasn't all sure that he could make a name for himself on his own, neither was I. Quincy, on the other hand, had worked with unharnessed brilliance like Michael's since his days with some of the jazz greats. In Michael, he'd finally found what he's been looking for in a talent, as he would tell me. Michael is the essence of what a performer and an artist are all about. He's got all you need emotionally, and he backs up with discipline and pacing. He'll never burn himself out. Now I am a pretty strong drill sergeant when it comes to steering a project, but in Michael's case, it's hardly necessary. Quincy was also amazed at Michael's versatility. He can come to a session and put down two lead vocals and three background parts in one day. He said at the time he does his homework, rehearses, and works hard at home. Most singers want to do everything in the studio, write words and music, figure out harmonies, try different approaches to a song. That makes me crazy. All I can see is dollar signs going up. Studio time is expensive, and that's why someone like Michael is a producer's dream artist. He walks in prepared. He accomplishes so much in a single session. It stuns me. In my opinion, Michael Jackson is going to be the star of the 80s and 90s. The two developed a close rapport outside the studio as well, and over the years, Michael could think of Quincy as a hip father figure. Michael would confide in Quincy and take direction from him in a way that reminded many observers of the kind and relationship the public thought Michael had with Joseph. However, Quincy was the antithesis of the natural father who used to hit Michael to get him to perform up to expectations. When I'm in a studio, I don't believe in creating an atmosphere of tension or hostility, Quincy once told Oprah Winfrey in an interview. That serves no purpose. I believe in creating an atmosphere of love. Finally, after listening to hundreds of songs, Michael and Quincy decided to batch to record. Among them were three Michael Jackson compositions: Dumb Funky, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, The Dance Floor, Scorcher, Working Day and Night, and The Prowling Urge, Get on the Floor, co-written with Louis Johnson, bassist of the Brothers Johnson. Quincy started to balance a mixture of songs with melody pop ballads like The Emotional and Symphonic She's On My Life, contributed by songwriter and arranger Tom Ballard. The bright Melancholy, it's The Falling in Love written by David Foster and Carol Bear Singer. The cute, sugary Paul McCartney song, Girlfriend, and most significant, the romantic, mid-tempo Rock With You, the driving Burn the Disco Out, and the Mighty Off the Wall, which will end up as the title of the album. All written by Rod Temperton, chief songwriter and keyboardist for the Britain-based pop R&B band Heatwave. With the songs selected, Quincy Jones stands someone a handful of crack session players, keyboardist oh, Greg Phineas, George Duke, and Michael Bodiger. Guitarist David Williams, Larry Carlton, bassist Louis Johnson, percussionist Flo Da Costa, and the Summer horns led by Jerry Hay, and they all went to work. During Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, which would become Off the Wall's first single, Michael unveiled a playful, sexy falsetto no one had ever heard from him before. All the right elements were in place in the song: an unstoppable beat, a meticulous, well balanced delivery of lyrics and melody, and a driving energy. Michael explained that he couldn't shake the song's melody when it came to him one day. He walked throughout the house humming and singing it to himself. Finally, he went into the family's 24 track studio and had Randy put the melody down on the piano. Michael couldn't play. When he played for Quincy, it was a done deal. It had to be on the album. Don't Stop was released on July 28th, 1979. In less than 3 months, it was top of the charts. Michael's first solo number one record in 7 years. It soared to number three in the UK, a huge hit for him. It was also the subject of his first solo video. When compared to the kind of musical videos Michael would do in just a few years, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough comes across as primitive and the only attempt at innovation. Michael appears briefly dancing in triplicate, still as fun and memorable because, after all, it's the first one. The album that resulted from all of Michael's work with Quincy, Off the Wall, was released in August 1979. Almost as much attention had been lavished on the album jacket as on the record itself. The cover photograph showed Michael smiling broadly and wearing a natty tuxedo and glitteringly white socks. The tuxedo was the overall game plan for the Off the Wall album and package, said Michael's manager at the time, Long Resner. Michael had an image before that as a young kid, and all of a sudden, there was a hot album and somebody very clean looking. The tuxedo was our idea as managers, Ron concluded. The socks were Michael's. Fans and industry peers alike were left with their mouths agape when the Off the Wall was issued to the public. Engineer Bruce Sweden had made sure Quincy Jones' tracks and Michael Jackson's voice showed to the best advantage. Michael's fans proclaimed that they had heard him sing with such joy and abandon since the early Jackson 5 days. The album showcased with an adult Michael Jackson for the first time, a real artist, not just someone's vocal stylist. Michael Jackson had officially arrived. The performances revealed sides of him never before heard by record buyers. For instance, no one knew Michael could be as smooth and sophisticated as he was on the album's outstanding track. Stevie Wonder's I Can't Help It. The song was important to the project because its Lucas chord changes were the closest Michael had ever come to singing jazz on record. Even more revealing was an emotional Michael crying real tears on the tail end of She's On My Life. Jones will later comment that Michael cried every time they cut the vocals. After several attempts with the same results, the decision was made to leave the tears in the track. The understated arrangement of his song, also a crowd pleaser, with its sparse keyboard accompaniment, allowed Michael to softly plead his regret of lost love in a touching, sometimes serene delivery. Burn Rock With You also made number 1 and then Off the Wall and She's in My Life both went to number 10. Michael became the first solo album artist to have 4 top 10 singles from one album in America. And Brent Off the Wall also made recording history with 5 hits released from a single album. Although it would sell 6 million copies worldwide, it never went beyond number 3 in the US and number 5 in the UK. Mark was excited but cautious. It's a start, he said. Joseph was a bit concerned. This thing with Michael, it's good, he said to one of the family's attorneys. I'm proud of the kid, but I'm worried. About what? Asked the lawyer. Too much independence, Joseph said. It's not good. You know, throughout history, stars have left groups, said the attorney. Sammy Davis left his family. Diana left the Supremes. Smokey left the Miracles. It happens. You can't keep a good star down. Joseph shook his head. Not in this family. It doesn't happen, he said. Michael knows. He knows. When Atwell won only one Grammy in R&B category, Michael was crushed. It bothered me, he said. I cried a lot. My family thought I was going crazy because I was whipping so much at. He was so disappointed Janet occurred. I felt bad for him, but he finally said, You watch, the next album I do, I'll show him. For his part, though, Joseph wasn't so disappointed. I think it's good to keep things into perspective, he said privately. The boy doesn't need more success. He needs to get into the studio with his brothers. That's what he needs.